No care for the little ones. Strong words from Pope Francis today on sex abuse cover-up in the church, as the Cardinal Archbishop of D.C. remains under scrutiny. World Meeting of Families. We head to Dublin, Ireland to preview the Holy Father's trip. Leaving the church. Hundreds demand a true separation of church and state after lawmakers in Argentina block an abortion bill. And the perfect pitch. A nun dazzles before a Chicago White Sox game. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, August 20th, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. Pope Francis speaks out amid what many are calling the most serious sex abuse scandal in American Catholic history. He's issued a letter to Catholics around the world condemning the abuse and its cover-up, and the Holy Father is demanding accountability. In a 3-page letter released in 7 languages, Francis says, "We showed no care for the little ones. We abandoned them." It comes ahead of the Pope's trip this week into Ireland, a Catholic country where the Church's credibility has been damaged due to abuse and cover-up. Alan Holdren is the EWTN Rome Bureau Chief. Alan, Catholics in the United States have been waiting for a response from the Pope. What is he pledging to do?
In his letter, Francis begs for forgiveness for the pain suffered by victims. He says lay Catholics must be involved in any effort to root out abuse and cover-up, and he blasts the clerical culture in which church leaders are more concerned about their own reputations than about the safety of children and vulnerable adults. We already expected clergy sex abuse to dominate coverage of this Ireland trip, but the issue has taken on more urgency after revelations that Theodore McCarrick, the former Archbishop of Washington, allegedly abused both adults and minors. The Holy Father says that no effort must be spared to create a culture to prevent abuse, and he acknowledges that the Church has been a little slow to apply sanctions and to take action.
A grand jury report in Pennsylvania last week reported that at least 1,000 children were victims of some 300 priests over the last 70 years. Did the Pope react to the report?
He did react to the report, Wyatt. He admitted that no effort to beg forgiveness of the victims will ever be sufficient, but he vowed never again. The Holy Father didn't say what measures he'll take to sanction the bishops in the U.S. and beyond who covered up for abusive priests. In this letter, Francis calls the activity of the abusive priests crimes. The U.S. bishops up until now have only referred to them as sins and omissions. Vatican spokesman Greg Burke said that that's significant. He also said that the Pope was speaking to Chilean, to Irish, and to Americans, but also to people of the entire world, and his words were strong. He didn't say what specifically would be done, though.
Alan, the U.S. bishops say they want the Vatican to conduct an investigation similar to the one it did in Chile earlier this year that led to all the bishops in that country offering their resignation. Did the Pope say anything about a Vatican probe?
The Holy Father didn't say whether or not the Vatican would approve of such an investigation. However, he does say that he supports efforts to make all those who perpetrate or cover up these crimes accountable. The Pope arrives in Dublin, Ireland this weekend to conclude the World Meeting of Families. He's expected to also meet with abuse survivors while there. The Holy Father is under tremendous pressure to address this painful topic when he speaks to the people of Ireland. They're not going to be the only people paying attention. The whole world is going to be watching this trip very closely, I think, Wyatt.
And we'll continue to follow Pope Francis as he travels this week. Alan Holdren, EWTN Rome Bureau Chief. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Wyatt.
Cardinal Donald Wuerl, Archbishop of Washington, has dropped out of the World Meeting of Families in Dublin, Ireland this week. He's embroiled in 2 major sexual abuse scandals. The first has to do with his predecessor, Theodore McCarrick. The second one dates back to his time as Bishop of Pittsburgh from 1988 to 2006. Correspondent Jason Calvi reports at the Archdiocese of Washington headquarters. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Wyatt. The Cardinal canceled his keynote address at the International Meeting on Marriage and Family. The Church holds that annual gathering every 3 years. Now, the Archdiocese won't tell me why he pulled out, but today he met here with a group of priest advisors as Catholics across the country expressed sorrow and sadness.
Cardinal Donald Wuerl served here in Pittsburgh for 18 years. Today, a sign at a Catholic high school named for him is vandalized. A recent grand jury report on 6 Pennsylvania dioceses accuses Wuerl of helping protect some child molesting priests during his time here.
I'm horrified. It's gut-wrenching. It's so sad. As a Catholic, I'm ashamed. I'm so sorry. And to the victims, my heartfelt sorrow and my prayers.
Some Catholics share those feelings, including at New York's St. Patrick's Cathedral.
So it's difficult for us to digest that, but the church is holy but full of sinners.
I also encourage people to not leave the church.
The faithful are struggling with how to move forward.
I don't know what can fix it. It's the bad individuals that make it happen. It's not the good Catholics or the Pope, but he needs to address it somehow and not try to push it under the table.
For others, the scandals are a wake-up to look inside their own souls.
Am I somebody that I can face my God at the end and say, here I am, I'm very happy with the type of life? I think this is a wake-up call for many Catholics throughout the world.
The devil exists everywhere, and unfortunately he penetrates into the Catholic Church at times, and we got to pull our weeds and purify ourselves just as Jesus tells us to.
Now, some Catholics say they want change, and until they see it, they're going to stop donating to dioceses. They say that will send a strong message to bishops. But a word of caution from Edward Peters. He's a prominent canon lawyer who teaches at Sacred Heart Major Seminary in Detroit. He says he wants to warn people, he cautions them against punishing the church and her children for the actions of a few bad priests. Wyatt?
Correspondent Jason Calvi reporting in Washington. Thanks, Jason. The Archbishop of Dublin says he hopes Pope Francis will speak frankly about the darkness of priestly sexual abuse during his upcoming visit to Ireland. Archbishop Dr. Martin dedicated his Sunday homily to the Holy Father's trip, which will be this Saturday and Sunday, August 25th and 26th. He said it comes at a time of heightened anxiety over the future of the Church in Ireland and beyond. Joining us now is Tracy Harkin with EWTN Ireland. Tracy, what did Archbishop Martin say?
Well, Wyatt, Archbishop Martin, in his last homily, gave quite a hard-hitting reflection on where the Irish Church is right now. Diarmuid Martin is Archbishop of Dublin and co-organiser of the upcoming World Meeting of Families here in Dublin, which begins tomorrow evening. So in his homily, he reflected on where is the Irish Church in light of the clerical sex abuse scandals. He talked about the expectation and joy for the future and the good work that's been done, but he talked about the very real dark shadow that hangs over our church at this moment, and he talked about the need to really put proper protocols in place, to have victims at the very heart of our thoughts and our prayers, and he called on the church as a body to pray and do everything that we can to make sure that this awful atrocity, as he described it, does not happen again.
Well, tell us more, because you had mentioned about his role in the World Meeting of Families. Tell us more about Archbishop Martin.
Well, he's co-organiser of the World Meeting of Families, Wyatt. Dublin is gearing up for that as we speak. We're standing here in Dublin Castle, where the very hub of the media of the world will be based over the next 5 days. So he has a leading role in this World Meeting of Families, and he's been very involved in the organisation of it. So what he says matters. People listen to what he says. The media in Ireland and throughout the world certainly listen to what he says. And again, he reflected really in the words of Pope Francis when he talked about the terrible scourge that has and shadow that's hung over the church in light of these reports. The Pennsylvania report, for example, is the one that's in most people's mind. It's the most recent one. And he talked about, in particular, the failure of those in church leadership also.
Okay, so the meeting begins tomorrow. There'll be panels and discussions on a range of issues affecting the family. You'll be hosting EWTN's coverage of the entire event. What is the mood like there?
People are very much looking forward to this World Meeting of Families. The World Meeting of Families the preparation for it began, Wyatt, in Ireland over a year ago when the programme was launched at Knox Shrine, our National Marian Shrine. And many parishes have been involved, and the 26 dioceses throughout Ireland have been involved in reflecting on Amoris Laetitia, the Pope's encyclical, which is really what we're going to be reflecting on over the next 5 days. And of course, very much looking forward to Pope Francis's visit to Ireland, only the second pontiff to ever visited the Irish shores.
Well, speaking of the Pope's visit, you know Pope John Paul II visited Ireland in 1979. A Pope has not visited since. What are you hearing from the Irish people about Pope Francis' visit?
Well, certainly 1979 was a very different time for Ireland. So much has changed. I was just a small child at the time. Over 2.7 million Irish people turned out in their droves to see the Pope in various occasions throughout Ireland at that time. So the visit of Pope Francis is certainly happening in a very different era. We've had, of course, the same-sex marriage referendum passed. We've had the abortion passed, again, by popular vote. But at the same time, Wyatt, there's many good apostolates that are happening. The Irish faithful are well formed, smaller in number, but very well formed and very focused on their mission at this time to renew Ireland in terms of the church and its outreach to society.
Okay, well, as we mentioned, EWTN will be covering the World Meeting of Families all week long. Tracy Harkin with EWTN Ireland, thanks so much.
Thank you, Wyatt.
And we will have more analysis of the abuse crisis coming up a little bit later in the show. President Trump continues to criticize the ongoing investigation into possible ties between his campaign and Russia. He accuses special counsel Robert Mueller's team of ruining people's lives and looking to impact the election. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Wyatt. The president's latest complaints come as a New York Times story reports White House General Counsel Don McGahn has been cooperating with the special counsel. The president says he allowed McGahn to speak with Mueller, but some on Capitol Hill are questioning the president.
According to Donald Trump himself, he gave Don McGahn the permission to go do these interviews. So now the president appears to regret it. And again, if you're actually innocent, you wouldn't regret Don McGahn doing this. You would have nothing to hide.
That was Congressman Ted Lieu, a Democrat from California. The president says he has nothing to hide. He says this White House has been the most transparent in history and has given over 1 million pages in documents to the special counsel. And today on Twitter, the president continues to attack Bruce Orr, a Justice Department official. The president has threatened to revoke his security clearance. Orr's wife worked for the firm involved in producing a dossier on Trump's alleged ties to Russia. Now the president is questioning why Attorney General Jeff Sessions hasn't fired Bruce Orr. Wyatt?
White House correspondent Mark Irons reporting. Thanks, Mark. Unknown attackers fired 6 shots outside the U.S. Embassy in Turkey today. The bullets came from a moving car and hit the embassy's security booth, gate, and window. The building is closed this week because of the Muslim holiday. American officials say no injuries have been reported. No suspects have been identified either. The investigation is still ongoing. Hundreds of people gathered in Buenos Aires, Argentina this weekend to demand the separation of church and state. It comes after lawmakers voted against the legalization of abortion earlier this month. Critics added their names to a growing list aimed at stopping the church's involvement in politics. Approximately 2/3 of the country's 43 million people are Catholics. Pope Francis, a native of Argentina, has denounced abortion and urges families to accept the children God gives them. Multiple strong earthquakes killed at least a dozen people on 2 islands in Indonesia. A 6.9 quake on Sunday was one of several that also caused landslides. At least 10 people died and more than 1,800 homes were damaged. Pope Francis prays for victims of massive flooding in India.
Sono stati duramente colpiti.
The Holy Father expressed his concern for the people in Kerala who were hit hard by very intense rains. Around 800,000 people have been displaced and over 350 have died in the flooding. Catholic groups are helping in the aftermath. Coming up, continuing coverage of the abuse scandal, including reaction from a priest in the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C., plus remembering a global diplomat. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. Allegations that disgraced former Cardinal Theodore McCarrick engaged in sex with adult seminarians have inflamed a debate about the presence of gay men in the priesthood. Some Catholics are calling for a purge of all gay priests. Others say gay men should be welcome if they remain celibate. Monsignor Charles Pope is in the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C. and serves in Holy Comforter St. Cyprian Parish. Monsignor, welcome back to the program.
Thank you.
You recently wrote a blog for the National Catholic Register saying active homosexuality in the priesthood have helped cause the crisis. You say a large majority of the cases involve sexual misbehavior by priests with same-sex attraction. This is obviously a very controversial topic, so can you explain what you mean?
Yeah, well, the 2004 John Jay report indicated that 81% of the offenses involved male victims, and of them, 78% of them were, of all the victims, were over the age of, they were post-pubescent. That is to say, they were sexually mature, even if they were still legally minors. So I think it's very arguable here what we're dealing with is largely, not entirely, but largely an offshoot of homosexual activity. And I think that my main concern is that we in the church, if we're going to have an honest discussion and a credible discussion about this, are going to be willing to talk about this.
Yeah, even if it's difficult. You also say that we already have a policy for dealing with the crisis, the sixth commandment, the universal call to chastity, as it applies to all of us, not just a certain attraction. Yeah. So do you think that this fundamental teaching has gotten lost in general, or priests in particular?
Yeah, I think we want to be careful never to single out anybody. We're all under the same standard. Whether one has a homosexual orientation or a heterosexual orientation, we are all called to live chastely. And that means for married people, it means absolute fidelity of mind and heart and body to each other. And for all of us who are unmarried, no genital sexual contact whatsoever. And there are no exceptions. And this is what ultimately unites us. And so we're not trying to single out, but rather unite and say we're all under this commandment, you shall not commit adultery.
Clarify this for us, Monsignor. What does the church teach about men with same-sex attraction who want to be priests?
Well, currently there's a policy that isn't universally enforced throughout the world, but generally speaking, that if they've got deep-seated homosexual tendencies, and this is usually determined by both interviews as well as psychological evaluations, that they ought not to be admitted to the seminary. And Pope Francis actually reiterated that last month. It's a long-standing policy, and it's not even been evenly enforced, and we see that in places like Honduras and other places where there's huge problems in the seminaries. I think in America we're beginning to get that under control. It's a charitable thing to say that those with same-sex attraction in an all-male environment are in a very tough place to be. That's not the place for them to be.
How are you and your brother priests dealing with all these scandals?
Yeah, well, just great sadness and anger too. I think we all feel a little sense of betrayal. We thought, well, this was really, we were really moving, and it seems that even before Tuesday with the grand jury, all the reports with Cardinal McCarrick and some of these other things coming out, and now we're seeing several of our seminaries being investigated. This is a sense of betrayal and also shock and dismay that some would act so badly to discredit the beautiful sacrament of holy orders and that we all share. And so many of us are trying so hard to work for God's people, and none of us are sinless. But this ongoing, consistent behavior is what needs to be addressed, and that's what I'm mostly concerned, that we'll have an honest conversation about the real dimensions of it.
And so important that we bring this to light. Monsignor Charles Pope with the Archdiocese of Washington, thanks so much for talking with us.
Good, thank you.
Stay with EWTN News for comprehensive coverage of the abuse scandals. We'll have the latest here on EWTN News Nightly, as well as at Catholic News Agency and the National Catholic Register. Former UN Secretary General and Nobel Peace Prize winner Kofi Annan has died at the age of 80. He was the 7th Secretary General in the United Nations history and spent 10 years at the helm of the UN. Annan championed human rights and urged the UN to protect civilians if their own governments turned on them. Before leaving office, the global diplomat helped secure a truce between Israel and Hezbollah in 2006 and helped broker peace in Kenya. Annan is survived by his wife and 3 children.
Up next,
I fully admit is more left-leaning.
A left-leaning bias? Conservatives are criticizing Twitter after an admission from the social media giant's chief executive. And step up to the plate, the Catholic nun who threw out the first pitch at the Chicago White Sox game.
Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby in for Lauren Ashburn. Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey admits on CNN the social media giant has a bias that is more left-leaning.
We need to constantly show that we are not adding our own bias, which I fully admit is more left-leaning, and I think it's important to articulate our bias and to share it with people so that people understand us. But we need to remove all bias from how we act and our policies and our enforcement.
But Twitter is under fire from conservatives for censoring content, and that includes pro-life groups. In response to Dorsey's comments, Lila Rose, founder of Live Action, says, quote, "You are blatantly discriminating at Jack. Twitter has blocked at Live Action and my ad accounts for years, precisely because of our pro-life viewpoint." Joining me now is Rachel Bovard, Senior Director of Policy at the Conservative Partnership Institute. Rachel, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Do you buy Dorsey's claim that Twitter doesn't censor content based on political ideology?
No. I think that it's become very evident that they do, whether or not they mean to or not. Their algorithms and their rules have created a situation in which many conservatives are being shadow banned, intentionally or not. And to be clear, it's fine if Twitter wants to have these policies, but it needs to articulate them and enforce them, not ambiguously, but enforce them across the board and articulate that they're doing so. They can't say, no, no, we're not doing it. Well, in fact, in reality, they are.
Pro-life advocates say they've had content censored on Twitter, like we just heard. The company says it wants to do better, but how does Twitter, do you think, change its culture, whether it's the algorithms, like you say, when it discriminates specifically against pro-life groups?
I think it really needs to take a look at its policies, because for whatever reason, they are discriminating against conservatives. They are being shadow banned or they're being blocked. And so I think they need to take a strong look at how they're censoring content and the consequences of that. And, you know, look, I think, you know, we live in an age where a lot of people don't want to support or allow a platform for views they disagree with. And it would be a real shame for these social media giants who claim they are sort of the platform now for free speech to be cracking down on this and censoring because of that.
Well, as you well know, President Trump is a big user of Twitter. He's also a big critic, actually. He says the administration will look into what Twitter's doing and how it censors content. In your view, does Congress need to get involved in this, pass some kind of legislation on this issue?
You know, I think it's up to the Facebook and Twitter to regulate themselves. I don't yet think there's a role for Congress, but I do think Congress needs to be vigilant, right? We need to have this social opprobrium, this social outrage to say, look, as a constituency, as users of this platform, you know, we want equal access and we want equal time for our content. And those comments, I think, are completely appropriate. But it's up to these social media giants to sort of step in and regulate themselves.
Well, it's nice to hear at least that we have a lot of pro-lifers, a lot of conservatives at least stepping up and shining light on the issue and letting people know about what's going on. Rachel Bovard, Senior Director of Policy at the Conservative Partnership Institute, thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Finally tonight, move over, Sister Jean. There's another nun on the sports scene. Sister Mary Jo Sobiek of Marian Catholic High School outside Chicago threw an impressive ceremonial first pitch at a Chicago White Sox game on Saturday. She showed off a trick as she bounced the baseball on her arm before pitching. On Twitter, the White Sox wrote, "One of the most impressive first pitches of all time." Quite an arm on that Sister Mary Jo. She used to coach sports at Marian Catholic High School. And with that, we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We're back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night, and God bless.